Hello, boys and girls. I hope you're ready for a story. In this week's Heart in a Suitcase, we are going to Chicago. I was obsessed with punk rock when I was a teenager. I played the guitar, painted my nails black, and listened to music so loudly I don't know how I didn't damage my hearing. Every minute of the day possible, I would be listening to music, and most weekends I would go to the gigs of the latest bands that I was obsessed with, that most people had never even heard of. There was one band, however, who absolutely held the top spot in my CD player. Blink 182. I had every album, including the demos, and they were the only band's music I ever learned to play on the bass guitar, which, by no coincidence, was a replica of Mark Hoppus, the bass player's, pink one. I was desperate to see them live, but back when they never took the trip over the pond. Unlike today, when you can hardly keep them away with every comeback album they do. So I decided one day, after seeing that they were doing yet another US tour and not venturing to the UK, that I would put my life savings into my obsession of finally seeing them live and fly all the way to Chicago. I needed a friend who was crazy enough to spend all of their savings and come too. To be fair, my entire life savings only added up to around $800 back then. But to be fair, it was actually an absolute fortune to me in those days. Kind of still is. My friend Emily, who was a year younger than me and obsessed with No Doubt, thought that it was a great idea as there was a gig where both bands were playing. And so at the age of barely 18, we packed our bags and went off to the US of A. Touching down in the Windy City, I suddenly felt like a little girl. Being all of a year older than Emily, I was technically the adult and had to look after her. It was strange wandering around in America after watching so many television programs being made there. Being surrounded by all the tall buildings in Chicago made me feel very small. We had decided to make a proper trip of it rather than just flying in for the gig and then flying home again, so we began our adventure with what anyone would do when in Chicago. Shopping. There is a road called Michigan Avenue, which is known as the Magnificent Mile, which has shop after shop of brands being sold for around a third less than they are at home. I stocked up on decent jeans and trainers, and we enjoyed the alien feeling of being ultra looked after by super nice shop assistants who would always be ready to greet you with a big smile and leave you with a sunny, "Have a nice day." I never quite got used to being called ma'am, though. I can see why Chicago is known as the Windy City. It was sunny and pleasant the whole time we were there, but had strong winds whipping up to keep you cool. All the roads are on a grid system, much like most of the big cities in North America. So you can see the tall buildings getting smaller and smaller as they disappear into the distance as you drive along a road. There were a lot of random sculptures on the streets too, normally placed outside of the office buildings, which reminded me of some classic 80s and 90s films that were filmed there. I almost felt like buying a grey suit with shoulder pads to walk around there. By the next day, we had got into our groove of the big city and went on a bus tour, stopping at all the key points, including the houses of the rich and famous and the houses where the rich and famous used to live. Needless to say, we never actually saw anyone of note. But I began feeling really quite queasy on the bus, despite the fact that I don't get travel sick and hadn't been drinking any alcohol, as the legal limit there is actually 21. And I completely embarrassed myself when I got off the bus and walked straight over to a bin on the street on a corner right underneath the L, the famous raised train system, and I threw up while shoppers, business people, and even a homeless guy looked at me with disgust at my actions. Having spent so much money on flying out to see the bands, we were determined to get a good spot, so we headed to the venue early and waited outside. We were eventually joined by a few Americans who took great delight in making us say bloody hell repeatedly throughout the day. We needn't have bothered getting there quite so early, as it was 5 hours before anyone else came to join the 6 of us. Oh, it was totally worth it though, as Tom and Mark drove into the venue. As they waited for the gate to open, they stopped to wave at us. I was so excited I thought I would burst. It was only a couple of years later though that I actually met the whole band properly at a festival in England, after the security guard took pity on me and snuck me backstage after I'd waited the whole day and refused to eat or drink just in case it made me need to go to the loo, just to catch a glimpse of them and be near the front. When the gates opened at the gig in Chicago, we ran through and made it straight to the front. There, with our new friends, we rocked out and even managed to catch some signed merchandise. At the end of the day, we drove off with the Americans to Taco Bell before they dropped us back at the hotel. And for just that evening, I felt like I was actually in one of the many American teen dramas that I used to watch all the time. I half expected to see a vampire slayer or a blonde witch with a pet alligator pop up. One night, we were headed back to our hotel and were so hungry. Right beside the hotel was a Wendy's drive-through. Not having a car, we walked up to the window. Despite the fact that there were no cars around at all, we were told that they could not serve us unless we were in a vehicle. I explained that we didn't have one, but they just would not serve us. Eventually, some cars arrived and we stepped back to let them get served. One of the cars had a man in who had obviously seen some of what was going on, and after he had his order, he parked up to ask us about it. We explained the predicament we were in, and he went on a rant about how bad it is that we were guests in his country and being shown this awful side where we couldn't get food unless we drove up to a window to have it handed straight to us without even getting out the car, and how this was probably half of the reason for the obesity issues in the States. We didn't point out that that is exactly what he had just done. After declaring that Wendy's is not America, the man offered to drive us through. Even at a young age, we were not naive enough to just get in a car with a random older man and drive around with him, so we devised a plan. Being the appropriate adult that I was, I decided to take the risk and be the one in the car, and Emily would walk in front of the car the whole way around to ensure that he didn't just drive off with me. Of course, neither of us thought what to do if he just ran Emily over, but we were really hungry. So with the lady who had initially turned us down for food looking at us like we were mad, we drove up to the window with Emily leading us like a funeral procession. The plan worked and we got our food. I'm sure the man in the car won't even remember us, but to this day, whenever Emily and I catch up with each other, one of us will always declare, Wendy's is not America. And we both fall about laughing. Well, that's it for Chicago. Thanks ever so much for listening today. And hopefully I'll see you next week for the next chapter. Bye-bye.